Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into something that, well, it might seem incredibly simple. Where does the water you use every single day actually come from?
Yeah, it seems straightforward.
For many of us, maybe in higher income countries, the answer is usually just one source, our tap, maybe some bottled water on the side.
Right, pretty simple.
But what if I told you that for billions, literally billions of people in low and middle income countries, that picture is far more complex?
It really paints a different picture, doesn't it? Imagine a daily reality where you might pick a different water source depending on what you need it for, or even, shift your main source when the seasons change.
Exactly. And this isn't just some hypothetical scenario, is it?
No, not at all. It's a widespread, deeply ingrained practice, but it's often kind of unacknowledged in the big picture.
And that brings us right to the heart of our exploration today. This vital yet often overlooked practice called multiple household water source use, or MWSU.
Oh. Simply put, it's this widespread strategy where households don't just rely on one tap. They intelligently use different water sources for different needs.
Like one source for drinking, maybe another for washing clothes?
Precisely. And these choices often flex with the seasons. It's super common, but it's somehow created this kind of global blind spot for the very organizations trying to help improve water access.
So our mission today is really to shine a light on this critical, often missed reality. We want to unpack why MWSU is so common, how the conventional ways of looking at water access have, well, completely missed it.
Yeah, how did we miss it?
And explore the surprising implications it holds for things like health, economic development, and even climate resilience.
We'll also get into the opportunities and, of course, the risks it presents.
Absolutely. And we're drawing insights from a really fascinating research perspective paper that brings this whole issue to the forefront. Okay, so let's start by trying to understand this blind spot. For decades, right, these big global efforts to monitor water access, like for the Millennium Development Goals, and now Sustainable Development Goal 6.1.
The big UN goals.
They've primarily focused on just one thing: a household's main source of drinking water. It's literally one question on surveys.
Yeah, what is the main source of drinking water for members of your household? That's basically it.
And the rationale behind that narrow focus, it's sort of understandable, isn't it?
Well, yeah, there was a clear need for simple, consistent indicators, things you could use for global comparison to easily measure development progress, track things globally.
Makes sense.
And it's the JMP, the Joint Monitoring Program, which you probably know as the global gold standard for water data, that pulls together all this data from huge national surveys.
Like the demographic and health surveys, DHS and MICS, the multiple indicator cluster surveys. Key tools.
Exactly. Those are the big ones for measuring population health and development indicators.
Right, and getting questions onto those massive surveys like DHS and MICS, it's apparently really competitive.
Oh, absolutely. Space is limited.
So simplicity really helped ensure those core questions about the main drinking water source made the cut year after year, which led to this huge body of internationally comparable data. It feels like a pragmatic choice for creating those big, consolidated global data sets.
And it is defensible for that specific purpose, for generating that broad, comparable, global data. But, and this is the key point from the research, it is not necessarily an adequate representation of all communities.
Okay, so fine for the big picture, but not so great locally.
Especially when you're looking at specific local studies or, say, planning infrastructure projects. The startling insight here is that our global metrics, designed for simplicity, have kind of unwittingly painted this incomplete, maybe even misleading picture of how billions of people actually get and use their water.
Hiding their strategies.
Yeah, hiding their ingenious daily strategies. It creates this significant blind spot, essentially masking the real water use behaviors of millions.
It's here where it gets really fascinating for me, because despite what those global surveys might suggest, MWSU is incredibly widespread. It's fundamental to daily life across so many developing countries.
Absolutely fundamental.
This isn't some, fringe behavior. For many, it's just the norm. It's their default way of operating.
Exactly. And that's precisely where that blind spot becomes so glaringly obvious. It's not just common. For many, it's the essential strategy for daily survival and convenience.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Take, for instance, a family in rural Africa.
Hmm.
They might travel maybe quite far to a borehole to get high-quality water specifically for drinking and cooking. That's the priority.
Okay, the safe stuff.
Right. But for bathing and washing clothes, they might use water from a much closer, maybe shallower well. It saves so much precious time and effort.
Or think about areas with really distinct wet and dry
Oh,
seasons.
yes, seasonality is huge.
Households there might rely totally on rainwater tanks for everything during the wet season, but then as the dry season hits,
They have to ration that stored rainwater. Maybe reserve it only for drinking because it's the highest quality they have stored. And then they have to intelligently find other sources for everything else, washing, cleaning.
sources that might be lower quality, but good enough for those non-drinking uses.
Precisely. And this practice isn't just in one region, it's reported everywhere. Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, Western Asia, East Asia, South Asia, Oceania, Latin America, it's truly global.
So why was it neglected for so long in detailed studies?
Well, historically, it was partly because it was just so difficult to design surveys to capture it properly. Imagine trying to map out the countless combinations of sources and uses changing across seasons, across different needs. How do you even begin to pin that down in a standard survey?
Yeah, sounds like a nightmare for survey designers.
It really was. But thankfully, we've seen technological advancements, things like CAPI, computer-assisted personal interviewing.
Like smart tablets for surveys?
Exactly. Basically, smart digital surveys that can dynamically adapt the questions based on the answers someone gives. So if they say they use a well, it can ask more questions about the well. If they mention rainwater too, it can branch off there.
That makes sense.
These approaches have largely overcome those earlier challenges. And partly because of that, there's been this marked increase in research interest in MWSU. Really, since around 2010, we're finally starting to shed proper light on this crucial reality.
In this reality, it has implications that stretch way beyond just counting taps or wells, right?
Absolutely. This blind spot we've been talking about, it isn't just some academic oversight. It has profound real-world consequences. Impacts everything from public health to economic development to climate resilience.
Okay, let's unpack those impacts. The implications seem staggering, especially for public health. What's the biggest issue there?
Well, a key one is that the current monitoring frameworks, focusing only on the drinking water source, often fail to identify actual health risks. Why? Because the sources households use for things like hand washing frequently differ from their main drinking source.
Ah, okay, so the water you wash your hands with might not be the same quality as the water you drink.
Exactly. And the proximity and consistency of a supply for hand washing, how easy it is to access right when you need it, that strongly impacts how often people actually wash their hands.
Which we know has a massive impact on health outcomes, disease transmission.
Huge impact. So the surprising health revelation here is it's not just about your drinking water quality. Even a momentary switch to a less safe source for something like hand washing or maybe rinsing food can silently introduce major health risks. It exposes this critical vulnerability that our standard measurement systems just routinely overlook.
That's a really critical point. And beyond health, you mentioned an economic development piece often gets missed too.
Absolutely. Think about it. Having water available for what we call productive purposes, so not just drinking and basic hygiene, but water for things like small-scale irrigation for crops or watering livestock, maybe for brick making or other small enterprises.
Things that generate income.
Exactly. Those uses play a critical role in helping households loop themselves out of poverty. But that's an aspect often completely overlooked by the narrow focus on just the drinking water source. If you're only asking about drinking water, you miss this whole other dimension of water use that's essential for livelihoods.
Okay, so health, economics, and then connecting this to the bigger picture, climate change. How does MWSU play into resilience?
This is where it gets really interesting from a resilience perspective. MWSU significantly enhances household resilience to climate variability and long-term change
Also,
because it allows households to access water from sources that are, and this is a key term, differentially vulnerable to hazards like drought or flooding.
differentially vulnerable. What does that mean in practice?
It means that, say, one source, like a shallow well, might dry up completely during a drought. But another source, perhaps a deeper borehole or a carefully managed rainwater tank, could still provide water.
Ah, so it's about not putting all your water eggs in one basket.
Precisely. It reduces the likelihood that all their water sources become unusable during a single climate event, whether it's a drought or a flood contaminating surface water. It's essentially a diversified portfolio, but for water.
That makes a lot of sense.
You can even compare it to how, big municipal water utilities operate in wealthy countries. They often use multiple reservoirs or they have interconnections between different water systems precisely to ensure supply sustainability if one source fails.
It's the same principle, just at the household level.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that in many communities, their MWSU patterns seem very intentional, almost purposefully designed. Like the example we used earlier, rationing stored rainwater during the dry season just for drinking. That's a deliberate strategy to ensure the highest quality water is available when it's most scarce for the most critical need.
That analogy to municipal utilities is really powerful. But surely, relying on all these different sources, it can't be a perfect solution. There must be downsides, risks involved.
That's a really important question because you're right. It's definitely not a simple good or bad situation. There are definite risks.
Like what?
Well, on the risk side, one major concern is pathogen exposure. Switching between different drinking sources, in particular, can be a high-risk practice.
Because the quality might vary significantly.
Exactly. Households might not always be aware of the varying quality levels between different sources they consider safe enough to drink at different times, so switching could increase the chance of accidentally ingesting waterborne pathogens.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Then there are potential issues with vector-borne diseases. There are reports of things like malaria or dengue increasing when new open or standing water sources, like uncovered rainwater storage tanks or ponds, are introduced close to homes or villages.
Creating breeding grounds for mosquitoes.
Potentially, yes. And another risk relates back to monitoring. Conventional monitoring efforts might suffer from a really systematic seasonal bias.
How so?
Well, think about when many of those big household surveys are conducted. Often it's during the dry season, perhaps because it's easier for survey teams to travel then.
Okay.
But if you're only surveying in the dry season, you could be getting a completely skewed picture of water source use. You'd be missing entirely how people use rainwater in the wet season, for example, or how their reliance on other sources shifts.
So you're potentially misrepresenting their water strategies for a large part of the year.
Exactly. You're missing the full spectrum of their water management practices.
Okay, so clear risks. But despite those, MWSU seems to present some really powerful, maybe even game-changing opportunities for water security, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The opportunities are significant. MWSU can be, and often always is, leveraged to significantly improve water security for low-income households. It acts as that portfolio of different water sources, helping households avoid over-reliance on any single one. That bolsters their overall resilience.
Especially with climate change, making things less predictable.
Even more crucial, yes. As climate change increases rainfall variability and the intensity of extreme events like droughts and floods, diversifying risk this way becomes absolutely vital. It's like a built-in adaptation strategy that people are already practicing.
And what about cost? Is there an economic opportunity here too?
Yes, and this is quite fascinating. There's a cost-benefit aspect. Low-income households may simply not want to pay the cost associated with achieving high microbiological quality water, properly treated water if they only intend to use it for non-drinking purposes.
Like for washing clothes or bathing or maybe watering a small garden?
Precisely. They might be perfectly happy with, or only able to afford, water of a lower quality standard for those uses. This potentially opens up an opportunity for something like dual system approaches.
Dual systems, like different pipes for different water qualities.
Potentially, yes, though maybe not formal piped systems in all contexts. But the principle is similar to what some high-income utilities are exploring, providing different qualities of water for different uses, perhaps at different price points. MWSU shows households are already making these kinds of quality for use decisions themselves.
So it sounds like to really manage the risks properly and to truly leverage these opportunities, we need a much deeper, more sophisticated understanding.
Absolutely. We need to get into the nitty-gritty of how, where, and why people choose their water sources in specific places.
And that probably involves better mapping too.
Definitely. Better mapping of local water cycles, water availability throughout the year, water quality variations, and, crucially, understanding the community behaviors and preferences driving those choices.
Which leads us to the knowledge gaps, right? What do we still need to figure out in terms of implementation, research, policy?
That's the next step. And what's really fascinating here is how MWSU often seems to just emerge independently all over the globe.
Organically.
Yeah, purely in response to local pressures, water scarcity, convenience, cost, and the available water resources in that specific place. The paper mentions, for example, finding really similar traditional rainwater collection practices, including that careful rationing during dry seasons in places as far apart as remote Pacific Islands and rural Vietnam.
Wow. So people figured out similar solutions independently.
It seems so. Which raises a really important question for development practitioners. Can MWSU be deliberately implemented or encouraged in places where it hasn't already evolved organically? And what are the potential risks or unintended consequences if we try to do that without fully understanding the local context?
That's tricky. And then there's the question of existing frameworks. You mentioned water safety plans earlier, WSPs from the WHO. How do they fit in, or maybe not fit in?
Well, WSPs have generally been very successful, especially for, centralized utility water supplies. But their appropriateness is much less clear in settings where you have lots of dispersed household level supplies, think private wells, rainwater harvesting systems.
Where it's not one big system, but thousands of tiny ones.
Exactly. Or, crucially, for evaluating the hygiene risks within these complex MWSU contexts. We talked about hand-washing sources differing from drinking sources. Standard WSPs aren't really set up to easily capture and manage those kinds of risks.
So the framework might be missing the real complexities on the ground.
It seems likely. The paper notes that more recent WSP templates do mention alternative water supplies, but often the evaluation is still limited to assessing their potential as drinking water sources.
So it's still focused on potability.
Right. They often fail to adequately address the very real health risks that can arise seasonally when water quantity becomes insufficient for essential hygiene practices, like hand washing, even if the drinking water source itself remains safe.
That seems like a major gap.
It really highlights the need for a much more comprehensive integration of MWSU realities into WSPs, or perhaps developing alternative safety planning frameworks that are better suited to these complex contexts.
And another challenge, you mentioned this briefly, is just the language we use in research, right? The terminology.
Yes, and this is critical for getting accurate, comparable data. There's often a lack of precision and consistency in how terms are used across different studies. For example, are we talking about access to a water source, meaning it's physically available nearby?
Versus actual use of it, meaning people are actively choosing to collect and use water from it.
Exactly. Those are two different things. And similarly, distinguishing between multiple sources, which might mean, say, two different wells of the same type, versus multiple source types, like using a tap in a well in rainwater.
The distinction seems crucial for understanding the strategy.
It completely changes the data and what we think we understand about the behavior. We need more clarity and consistency there.
Okay, so lots of challenges. But what's the path forward? It sounds complex to study.
It is complex, but the path forward is actually clearer now than ever before, largely thanks to technology. Those electronic data collection platforms, the CPI systems we talked about.
Smart surveys.
Right. With their automated logic and branching questions, they make conducting detailed MWSU surveys much more feasible than they were with paper forms. We have the tools now.
So we can ask these more complex questions at scale.
We can. And we should also probably be doing more analysis of existing data sources that might already contain relevant information beyond just that single primary drinking water source question. Things like national censuses or specific modules within certain DHS surveys sometimes ask about secondary sources or seasonal use. We need to mine that data better.
So pulling it all together, the main takeaway seems to be that MWSU is this widespread, incredibly important reality for households.
Absolutely. Fundamental.
Yet it's been largely underreported and underappreciated in the global water sector.
Yes. And as the evidence for this behavior keeps emerging from more and more different contexts, the time is really right now for researchers, for implementers, for policymakers to actually measure it, understand it properly, and incorporate that understanding into their work.
Because not doing so has had consequences.
Potentially quite significant ones. This lack of understanding, it turns out, has likely led to, well, the paper provocatively calls them perverse outcomes from some of our own water interventions.
Perverse outcomes, meaning interventions might have unintentionally made things worse.
Or at least missed opportunities. We may have been overlooking or even undermining existing, efficient, and sustainable local water management strategies like MWSU, because we didn't see or value them. Missing chances to leverage local resilience for development and climate adaptation, maybe sometimes trying to fix what wasn't actually broken, and definitely overlooking what was already working well.
Wow. So as we wrap up this deep dive then, It feels like we started by just, shining a light on the seemingly simple question, where does your water come from?
Yes, simple question.
Only to reveal this incredibly complex, intelligent world of household strategy, of resilience that our conventional frameworks have, maybe inadvertently, just hidden in plain sight for decades.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What if our existing frameworks for measuring global progress, things designed for simplicity and comparability,
Huh.
what if they're actually obscuring the full picture, hiding the reality of human ingenuity and resilience when people face resource challenges?
Yeah.
How might a deeper understanding of these localized, often complex, multi-source strategy actually lead us to more effective, more sustainable global solutions, not just in water, but maybe in health, in climate adaptation, and beyond?
It really prompts you to think differently, doesn't it? Consider the diverse ways water is really used in communities around the world. Maybe even reflect on your own water use habits. What other critical details, what other human strategies might we be overlooking simply because we rely too heavily on broad, aggregated data? That's definitely a powerful thought to carry forward.